recently. He actually, the Finger Lakes Land Trust put on a webinar that he talked about, so he was essentially interviewed about his book, his second book and things like that. But excellent writer, very engaging and intriguing, and just reads really, really smoothly. He's a journalist, so he really has a fabulous writing style. So, all right. Any questions to start before I get going and kind of go blast into this, and just stop me if you have any questions, but I'll kind of tie this back in with a little bit more about our organization at the end and how it kind of relates and things like that. And we do have some materials on the back from our organization in our office. It's just down the road, so if you ever want to come visit us and ask more questions about topics related to this book, then please do that. We'd love to see you. So, all right, so The Death and Life of the Great Lakes. Dan Egan. It was a New York Times bestseller and finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, and I definitely could 100%. What's that? Oh,
Yeah, I see the seat.
It says English.
oh, did I? Oh.
Pulitzer is the seat.
No big deal. So I created this in Canva, and it doesn't have spell check, so I am a horrible speller. And maybe
Don't worry about it.
I had been like, in my days of studies, back when I was in, high school / college, I was always like on time with it. I'm such a procrastinator these days, and I don't know if it's just, I don't know why, but so I did a spell check after I downloaded it, so I apologize for it. You'll probably see a lot of spelling errors throughout this, not my strong suits, but I promise it'll be engaging this. Okay, that's not working, unless I'm pushing the wrong button. Oh, there we go, okay. I gotta be smarter than technology. Okay, so Dan Egan, awesome writer. He is a reporter from the Milwaukee Journal Centennial. Sentinel, sorry. We probably have lots of English majors and things like that. Talking about like grammar and stuff like that. And senior water policy fellow at the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. So just a very, very cool guy. I would love to meet him someday. It's too bad he wasn't here for the presentation. So, all right. So my personal review of the book, I thought it was incredible. The detail was just so captivating, just so much was happening. So I give it 5 stars. So many layers to uncover with this. Like I just really, like I said, I was blown away by the number of things that he had to unfold about the journey of the Great Lakes. And it really, the unfoldment, it kind of progressed because of, human development and ideas and getting excited about, the expansion of the trade market. So essentially it was opening up the Great Lakes system to be like the Mediterranean was over in Europe and things like that. So that's what the people and policymakers and what they were thinking about when they were doing it. So all good and well, but just not really like stopping to think about, and they might not even consider that being an issue. I probably wouldn't have even thought about it, but when you have opening up the doorway to, so the Great Lakes system is a big chunk of it, and then we'll find as we kind of move a little farther how it even affects a big majority of the continental U.S. because of those connections that progress over time. So I wanted to keep reading, but look away at the same time because you're just like, what? Like, really? Is there something else that cannot possibly happen to this system, and really, how can it even survive it? So it's really essentially, it's literally has been death and life of this system for a number of different reasons and things that we talk about a lot within our organization and things like that. And things you've probably heard in the news and things we can't really escape, like when I mentioned the invasive species, but also harmful algal blooms and things that we know happen, every summer on our lake and lakes around the world. So it's something we have to deal with and kind of be schooled about. So coming to something like this is a great way to kind of begin that journey even more if you've never heard of it, and kind of share it with others and things like that. So a lot of looking away, but you also just want to keep going and figure out what's happening next. Is there going to be a solution here? So important to read because similar threats to the waters all over the world. So we can hopefully be a solution here. This is kind of a cool map. So we have Lake Superior. So Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, and Lake Ontario. So Lake Superior is essentially like the headwaters of the system. Like that was one thing I learned. I never knew. It functions as a river system, a slow-moving river system, because of the higher elevation. above sea level, and it moves down through the system. And we know obviously Niagara Falls is not far from up here, so that was kind of the biggest thing, is there were people coming in and during the explorers' time, you know, we had moved through the St. Lawrence, but then there starts to be this system has like, it functions like an ocean almost, because obviously you have the waters moving, but there's big tidal waves, there's been so many shipwrecks here and things like that, and it's just this incredible system that's moving out through the St. Lawrence and eventually into the Atlantic Ocean. So 600 feet above sea level, holds, like I said, mentioned before, holds about 20% of the world's surface water, 90% in the US, 94,000 square miles. So it's just so much has happened. So it's a beautiful system. But it comes down to what he's discussing here is the threats to the Great Lakes systems. And it moves from the invasive, but pollution, we know a lot of our industry has been on the lakes and rivers. You know, that was easy for boats coming in and transporting things. So, and because you have these habitat destructions coming from industry, people building their homes, then you have threats to the wildlife and things living in the water as well. Not just the invasives that are killing off things. So, and then we know about, you know, things we have to talk about with climate change affects, you know, changing temperatures. We know, I was just reading, kind of brushing up a bit before I came over. Which lake was, I think it was, a lot of the lakes now don't freeze over completely anymore. And actually, we think evaporation rates would be higher in the summertime, but they're actually, because of the water staying warmer longer, like the wind's blowing over, evaporation actually is higher, and like in the winter it was saying. So, you know, that's an issue if we're losing some of our waters that way through evaporation and things like that. So, just things to think about. So these are some of the touch points throughout the book. And some of the favorite books that I read are children's books. I learned like a ton from reading to my youngest. And this is kind of like, this wasn't a children's book because it didn't have there was pictures actually, so there's some pictures in there. But there's, it reads words like there's just so much there. And that's why I really liked it, and I really encourage you. It's just a neat read because it's eloquently written, but it's engaging and it wants you to keep reading. And you're using your imagination and imagining a lot of these things that are happening. So he's interviewing a lot of people, and this is done over like, I don't know the span of time he was researching for this book, but he interviewed people from all walks of life. The biologists that were working on the lakes. He was interviewing farmers, you know, the things with phosphorus issues and nutrient loading into the lake. So talking to the fishermen, people that were involved with, you know, the fish economies on the lakes and things like that, because you know that was a big part of it as well. People involved with industry and things like that. So you're getting touch points from all walks of life here. One thing that kind of touched home for me, not because I like children's books down here with the lower accent, was one of my favorite books growing up. Was Dr. Seuss is one of my favorite writers. But that was something that stuck out with me is, so the Great Black Swamp, so this is off of Lake Erie. So has anybody ever heard of with Toledo, Ohio had issues with their water supplies. So they struggled with like big bloom events coming on Lake Erie. And the reason Lake Erie has so many issues, more so than the other lakes, is, so it's the most south, it's the shallowest and the warmest. And that's gonna help engage those blooms, and also with the nutrient loading and things coming from the land. So back when settlers came, and this is the same thing with over Washington DC, a lot of things on the East Coast, there was this connotation where people thought that swamps and wetlands were bad. They smell and they're icky, but they are so important to our ecosystem and really protecting our waters. And one of my favorite classes when I did my graduate work was my wetland class. There was like just chemistry and things that are happening there. So our wetlands are helping to collect any pollutants and runoff that are coming in that might be filled with any type of pollution and things like that. So it'll filter out, it's like our natural filter. So it filters out and holds some of that pollution rather than going right into Lake Erie. So that is what happens now because the Great Black Swamp, essentially when people started settling, they started putting in like miles and miles of drainage ditches to get that water to drain. So now it's a big area for farming. It's very fertile, lots of nutrients there, you know, all that organic matter that was there at one point. So all of that is now no more. So that's a big contributing factor of why there's so many issues with those blooms in the Lake Erie area. And I think a little bit south of that is where Toledo is located, so. In the book, The Lorax, he actually mentions, so the, here, I think I wrote the quote down, I don't remember if I can read my handwriting because so in the quote in the Lorax, fish walk on their fins and get woefully weary in search of some water that isn't so smeary. I hear things are just as bad up in Lake Erie. So that actually used to be something he mentioned. I think that was, I don't know, it was written in the 70s or something like that. So that was like a comment he made, and so there were some people, biologists and people working really hard to kind of work on the Lake Erie issue when that was really bad to reduce the phosphorus levels. And they got it in control, and it really did clear up and things were good for a while. But then, so they actually contacted him to be like, see if he would take it out of his copies going forward, and he did. But then in the book it goes on, and he would probably want to put it back in now because it's now happening again. So those phosphorus issues, because phosphorus used to be, so it's naturally in our rocks and systems, but I don't know if it's readily available, but, so it's in our system, our natural system, but they were using it for like detergents, I think, or soaps or something, so that was something that they really cut back on a lot of that, and I had to go back to get all the details with that, but, so, it did improve, but unfortunately, it got worse, so there's this, you know, we ups and downs in systems, and, so part of what he was doing, he was interviewing farmers about the issues with the nutrient runoff and fertilization and things like that. So they're aware, and they really don't want to be the problem. So when they're interviewing them, they're all like, I'm really doing what I need to do. You know, I'm doing the best practices, and I think that they really are full-heartedly trying to do what they can. But I think just because how the system's set up now, because those swamps are no longer there, it's just that's issues we have around here. We have a lot of agriculture, so we have things that are unfortunately running off. If you don't apply fertilizers or things at the right time, they run off with the soils during storm events or snow melt. So those issues are things that could contribute to the issues in our lakes as well. So it's something that happens around anywhere there's agriculture or where we use fertilizers and things like that. There's other factors involved. So it's just, I think the education piece, and the more we talk about it, the more we kind of figure out ways we can really start to mitigate these things. And I think everybody wants to be a part of the solution. I don't think I ever would hear anybody say, no, I'm just gonna do this, I don't care what anybody thinks. Because we know that we all need water. We know here, Canandaigua Lake is a drinking water source for 70,000 people, so it's a lot. And the same thing, the Great Lakes. The people here, the states that surround the Finger Lakes, they are very protective, of the Great Lakes. They're very protective of the water. So they have these boundaries already set in place for those that are allowed to draw from the Great Lakes. So that's kind of an issue, something I kind of mentioned later in the presentation, that people are going to, west in places where there's issues with water, they don't have as much. Will they be coming and tapping at the door of these states and be like, hey, can we create a pipeline to, siphon out the water? And that's something that's kind of scares some of these people. They're protective of it, understandably, but I guess it comes down to, these are countrymen and things like that. We want to share. I know over in China they have done that, where they've done things where they're pipelining water to different areas. So these are things that we might have to address further down the road. Policymakers might have to think about those things, because there's places that just don't have those water resources. They reference Atlanta, Georgia, based on its placement. Can't exactly remember. I don't know if it's on like a hill or something. It's just so they have a reservoir they pull from. So there's areas of drought, and then so there's cities and places that have a lot of high population. They have to kind of start thinking about these things and what they're going to do. So, let's see here. So canal systems. I think we all know about the Erie Canal, but I really never understood the extent of the canal systems that went on to really open up to the Atlantic. So we have, first of all, there's Erie Canal, the Welland Canal I believe that was built by the Canadians. And the St. Lawrence Sea area was a project that was between Canada and US. So it was there's certain parts they paid for and kind of worked on that project together. You have to go back and kind of read some of that to know all the full details. And then there was the Chicago Sanitary Canal, which is that one is quite interesting. So we'll kind of touch on those a little bit. Anybody ever done a tour of the Erie Canal? Back in fourth grade, we were doing that, it was very fun. So that was kind of the first opening of the water, so this opens in 1825. It used to be a rough pass to get from Albany to Buffalo, so people were really thrilled about that, to be able to move both. But this was like a smaller system, so there wasn't like you think about the St. Lawrence River, when you go to Thousand Islands, you don't see those big barges, it's just not capable of doing that, okay? So we have the Erie Canal, then there's the Welland Canal, Canadian connection of the Lake Ontario to Lake Erie, so that's when I was reading the book, you talked about, and I was like, how on earth are they ever gonna be able to connect these lakes with the Niagara Falls? It's just like nuts to think that they can engineer these things, and I'm not an engineer like mine by any means, so it's the fact that they can create these systems. I think one of them, this one, opens in 1829, it has a 40 lock system. 40 locks, imagine, so it's because they're like that difference in, yes, elevation, thank you, so it's, but this one was built a little bit more for larger carrying capacity for the freighters, but kind of one thing I read as they were kind of talking about it, basically after they finished it, it was already outdated because like the ships just got bigger and the barges bigger, so it really couldn't at that point really handle much. So yes, yes, yep, exactly. So like cars and big trucks and things like that, you know, we didn't really have those big trucks moving like that was during this time. So that kind of started competing a bit. So there's always like the people that were in the train industry and the barge industry. So there's like this back and forth there. Really, some people didn't want to build wider canals and things like that to get bigger things because they wanted them to be using their trains and things like that. So then obviously it's economics at play. So, so the St. Lawrence Seaway. Okay. So these were engineered to be quite bigger. So a lot of these, the goal is so these barges can move from these big cities like Chicago, Cleveland, Duluth, Buffalo, Toronto, all those. So the ideas behind it is great. And there are still these boats that move, within the Great Lakes, but there's just, I think what Dan was kind of emphasizing throughout it was, and some people might speak differently to it that were involved like with the seaways and things like that. It just really wasn't what people were expecting it to be as far as the amount of things coming in, as successful as they thought it would be. So this was the one I was talking about where basically after they completed it, it was almost obsolete with like some of these barges that wanted to come moving through. And the other issue with moving through the Great Lakes system and these canals is it's frozen, for a number of months. Maybe not so much anymore, but at times, but that's an issue. So there's like 3 months out of the year that they, maybe plus, that they can't even be using this system. So it's kind of a bummer, that what do you do for those 3 months? You're kind of like just kind of maintenance and things like that. So, and the other issue is like they just didn't have like the ability to really move these ships and these systems, like the different cities and things like that. There would be jam-ups. Like there was one story when a captain was talking about he was waiting in line forever to, dock at one of these bigger cities, and he got fed up, went to go pick something else up, came back, and we're still in line, and then he's like, screw it, I'm going, and I think he just didn't care, so they ended up rerouting the cargo he was supposed to pick up through like the train. So I like hearing the stories because these are people that are actually living these things, you know what I mean? Like it's easy to write about something from reading textbooks, but he was interviewing people and talking about their experiences in these things through all of these different endeavors. So, like you said, he just didn't think the seaway was, as the years went on, less and less big boats and things were using the seaway. So I think they ended up like forgiving some of the money that was put into it, like the funding for it. So it was like billions of dollars. I think both from maybe millions, but both on Canadian and US side. So it was quite the investment for that project. So the setbacks, didn't come obsolete, trains and roads like we talked about. The Chicago Canal System, anybody ever heard of the Chicago Canal System? So it's the Chicago, I'm trying to think how that's connecting. So basically they did this canal system, and they eventually, it gets to the point where it actually connects to the Mississippi River, and I'm trying to remember if it's the Chicago River. I'm sorry, there's so many like different lake systems on there, so it connects in with the river, And after they did this canal system, it was basically so they could dump their wastewater after it's been treated, and it goes down to the Mississippi, through the Mississippi basin. So like the people in like the Mississippi watershed are getting Chicago's wastewater, so that it was kind of battles between that, and they weren't really too happy about it. But it actually rerouted, so the Chicago River, I think it was, it actually started flowing the other direction because of, carving this canal out, so. To make sure, I'm pretty sure that's the river. We'll come back to this, so the Mississippi River Basin covers 40% of the continental USA. So if you go down the Mississippi, obviously there's so many states there that are actually right directly on it, but it's, a lot of the watershed is coming down and going down to the Gulf of Mexico. So there's, when we come back and talk about like the invasives and other issues that are coming up, that's why it's a big problem, because then it's opening up all those problems. Anything from the Mississippi coming in that's invasive, which is one of them is the Asian carp, which I feel like I'm so behind on some of the stuff I had never heard of. It's one of them, which one is it? One of these is a YouTube sensation. I think it's the silver Asian carp, where people go out and have nets and they're like just flying out of the water, so people are trying to catch them. And so you should YouTube it. It's really funny. Some of the videos of what people do. So it's like a sport for that. So at least they've tapped into something to kind of help with that invasive. So some people have learned. One of them that they actually, it's become like a fish that people eat. So they kind of you take the best things you can from an issue that comes from invasives and things like that. And we'll kind of come back to that at the end. Some positives that come from it. And we'll talk about that fish later. So an issue with them though, because now fish could come up through the Mississippi River Basin up through the canal and then get into essentially Lake Michigan. Now that is, opening up all sorts of problems. And this is with the Asian carp, which was released, not accidentally. They didn't really think about it. I think it's after some funding. They were using Arkansas to kind of clean hatchery or tanks or something like that. So then when the funding was up, they just released them. Oh, no big deal, which is sometimes when people do that with their fish tanks, they'll release stuff with like certain plants in it, and that's what they suspect with hydrilla, which is an issue, like an aquatic plant on Cayuga Lake, that someone there, or actually Tinker Nature Center, I think in Henrietta, same thing they found it there, that people maybe dump their aquariums with certain plants in it, it's not even thinking that it would be an issue. Is that the thing with was it the python in Florida? Or one of the big snakes that, someone just released it into the wild, so now it's like people go hunt those or whatever. So it's been happening for a long time with issues with invasives and things like that. So I'm not much of a fish person. I don't know a lot about fish, but I was captivated by a lot of the ones they talked about. So the lake trout was one of the hardiest and most recognizable fish in the Great Lakes for a long time, but because of the sea lamprey, so this is when they first found it in Lake Michigan in 1936. So over decades, it really started to become an issue. Have you ever seen the sea lamprey before? That's a small picture. I think I have another one.
Scary. The mouth is what.
Oh, right there. So
Yeah.
up in the corner here, it is so creepy. It's like an eel-like creature. It's just like, it reminds me of like, I don't know, like alien-like or something. And so it's this creepy little dude that likes to, it just sucks on things. So basically, this contributes to the decline of a lot of like the native fish populations. And just from here, like just became like this spiraling effect. So the sea lamprey came up through, the canal systems, and then they just kind of did their duty there, or they just kind of took over. So that is an also interesting description. So he was talking to, I think his name was Vernon Applegate. So he's a biologist, and he was responsible for coming up for this lampricide as poison, basically to help kill and control the population. So they will live, I think it's a few years in like stream systems. So they're just these little worms that live down in like the sediment and things like that. But then they'll come up to the surface, and feed and things like that. But that's kind of how he started to control them, was doing these poisons in the stream system where they were located. So it's a lot of these things, like it just seems like creepy to think about them using poisons. They also did this to find out how much Asian carp they had in the canal system in Chicago. So in and they weren't finding them, so we'll come back, this Asian carp, they're kind of crazy, and they're just really hard to catch as well, so there was this, I'll go back and get sidetracked with that, but there's just so many cool stories, and that's why when I was putting this presentation together, I was like, but I want to talk about this, and then there's just so much, so I really just encourage you to read it, because I'm just I'm not even scraping the surface of how cool, just how it put together. It's not a cool story by any means, because a lot of it's very depressing, but it's just that's in a way, that's how life is not always, rainbows and things like that. So this is what we deal with, so we kind of see what we can get from it, but yes.
Well, because I think you have to be informed for change to take place.
100%.
Right? I mean, we can live in head under the sand and ignorance, and nothing's going to change.
Mhm. 100% agree. So that's kind of, and I find with issues like this, sometimes in environment's obviously my passion. I'm just so grateful to be in a field that I love to do. So there's just so much I need to learn, but it's for we need our environment. We need it for our water and our food. So it's one of the most important things that we need to protect each other. So it's just waking up and realizing that, and kind of coming up with again solutions and things we can. Because if we're just talking about doom and gloom all the time, then we have to have a solution. So that's how we come together and talk about these things and educate. So yes, 100%. So plus size, I did get this under control after doing these poisons with the little guys. So they did decline. But then there was the alewives, so also known as the river heron, I think. So these little guys came up again as well through the Atlantic and just kind of took off because there just wasn't a predator or anything really for them to eat, because we had already known that some of the native fish populations had declined. And some of them I don't think really the trout I was reading just recently, I don't think that they would eat fish. So they didn't have anything killing them off. So 1960s, they're swarming Lake Michigan, and again, this is another story. We're talking about a pilot was just flying over Lake Michigan and sees these white streaks all over the lake, and what is that? So it's just starting to imagine yourself in these situations where you imagine. So if you're living in Chicago, eventually these square miles of these streaks were moving through the system, but then they ended up on the shore of Chicago. So all these people were hired to basically dig and bury these, piles of dead fish, and it was goo and yuckiness and just up to their knees of fish. It's just crazy, that there's just that many of them. But this is what happens when the ecosystem gets out of whack, with just so much was happening. It's like a bad dream that this stuff was happening in a way. So that is another issue with the alewives. So then this gentleman, Tanner, so he's a doctor of fisheries. He became Michigan's chief of fisheries. He had, I can't remember if he was the one that was, in the service at one point and came back. But he grew up in the Michigan area. I don't know if it was Milwaukee, I can't remember. There's so many characters in here, it's hard to keep them all straight, but they all just have you could just tell that they would be really fascinating people to talk to. So maybe I'll go into journalism, but I can't write very well, so I probably wouldn't be the best. But it'd be fun to interview at least and have someone else write the papers or something. So he had another idea, so they actually, because of all these issues, he kind of had them come back, and someone encouraged him that he must have gone to school with or something. His idea was to build the economy and make this a big angler type of experience now. So his proposal was to, I can't remember if it was Coho or the Chinook salmon first. It was called 1966. They released this Coho salmon, which is from the Pacific coast, I believe, and he wanted to make this into an angler's paradise, and he did. And this is for decades. People were really coming here, and because they're tough to pull in. They're not an easy, just leisurely pull in with your line or whatever. So this was something that a lot of the towns and cities around became really big booming areas because of this. So I think there's some benefits to this, but then because they didn't have any other really big fish that were competing with them at this point, so they fed on the alewives, and they cut that population down big time. So that helped with obviously the alewife if I'm pronouncing that right, population. But they actually were they weren't sure they would be able to do this, where they actually did start breeding naturally, because these were coming from hatcheries, so they were, obviously putting them in, so they did start breeding in the wild, but then there was too many, so then they're all competing for food, so the populations of the salmon start to decline in the 80s and 90s, and then like another cycle was kind of ending here, so it's just like one saga after another. So obviously on top of these layers, we have industry, there's pollution going on, and I'm not sure if the Cuyahoga River? Cuyahoga River, I should have put it, Googled it to make sure I said it right. So so before 1969, this kind of put it on the board to finally actually make the Clean Water Act happen in 1972, but there was like so many fires on this river and others prior to this, like before it actually hit the headlines. So it's been happening for a long time, where just industrial waste was being dumped in the water. And it was like, okay, that was just, people knew about it, and it was, but no one was doing anything about it. So finally, enough people stood up and like, this cannot happen anymore. So as a result, they finally, got this act underway.
So are you talking about the actual river was on fire?
Yeah. Yeah, because there was just so much waste products that it was just like.
It's like oil and stuff. I moved to Cleveland in 1970, so this was still like a current event. It was just swamped with floating oil.
Well, as a child, I lived in Pittsburgh, and we would go to Lake Erie, but we weren't allowed to go in the water.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that.
Yeah.
It's like, talk about torture, taking a kid to the
I
line, you can't go in.
Yeah, they talk about in the book, there's signs like for Lake Michigan, or was it Lake Michigan, or no, it was Erie, I'm sorry, Erie. That there's like, tells you about the blooms, but like if you're young and have, vulnerable, like, so it's kind of like said in a way like, don't go swimming. So some people would still go swimming, even though they had to be present. So yeah, pretty crazy. So we had pollution happening on top of all these guys that we talked about, many of them. So like, there's just so much happening, devastation to the lake ecology. It's just it's all over the place because of all these many factors. And then here, if you boat and things like that, you'll see those clean, drain, dry signs. So because of these canal systems, and then we talked about the Mississippi River being connected now, one critter that it's kind of just here, and it's like there's nothing we can do about it, is the zebra mussels and the quagga mussels. So the quagga mussels are actually worse than the zebra because I don't think they need a hard surface to attach to like the zebras do, and they can like live deeper into the system, into the water. So zebras are only up to 60 feet, and then the quaggas up to 540. So again, it's just like this whole invasive thing is happening on top of the pollution issues. And they attach to intake pipes, so that's issues with water if they're trying to get water. And so these are things that are costing millions of dollars to mitigate and control after they take over. So once they found them, so the first finding of the zebra mussel was in 1988. So this is St. Clair, Lake St. Clair is between Huron and Lake Erie. Just once they find them, they're probably already they just populate so quickly. It's just, you really can't, once you find it, it's like there's nothing you can do. Yeah.
I've lived on Seneca Lake for many years, and I can remember when the zebra mussels first came, there was talk about, their shells will be 2 feet deep, you won't be able to get in the water, plug up your pipes, none of that came.
It's true, it hasn't really been like I haven't tracked the issue here, so it's interesting why some places they take over, maybe they've kind of gone through a cycle and things like that. And actually, at the end, there was talking about how one of the fish has adapted over time, where now they wouldn't have originally eaten the zebra mussel, but then they started to like palate, and they actually grew like something on their body to kind of adapt to then eat it. So maybe there's this systems that have things that have adapted to kind of help control it a bit. And I'd actually like to track that a little bit. I'd be kind of curious to know, but you see them, but I don't see them like all over, like some of the stories they were talking about with, what's the next page? So Lake Mead and Lake Powell, like when they found out about the, how they were started moving through the continental US, they had these strict policies that were like just inspecting boats, and you could get jail time and big fines if you were found to have transported zebra or quagga mussels on your boat. So they're like these hitchhikers coming through. So unfortunately, both places have been susceptible to it. You know, I'm kind of interested to see where they're at with all the issues now. So it's like, I think it just comes to a point where you have to accept that, you know, these things might happen, like these threats, when you know that they're in like Pennsylvania, like spotted lanternfly or other things that have moved their way up. You just kind of prepare what's your best, you know, really it's so hard to like control something like invasive species because they're just gonna do big things. We can only hope that maybe they'll just kind of settle out. So maybe that's something that some systems, like Seneca Lake is a lot larger than some of the other Finger Lakes. Maybe they just, it's not as detrimental there and things like that. I don't really see them lining their beaches and things like here in Canandaigua or anything like that. So some of the effects you see other places, you know, they'll have them be like below the lines of the, you know, the water line that will be lining the walls of beach-type pipes. So I'd like to do a little bit more research on a lot of these things I read about because I was just really intrigued by a lot of it. Because I just went, wow, I know nothing. Like I just really need to like learn, and because it's like unless you find a niche and you're like specialized in an area, you're just scraping the surface on so many of these topics. So it's like, so I'm intrigued to like kind of follow the zebra and quagga a little bit more because there are some, you know, contributing factors and correlations between them and like the harmful algal blooms in the lake system. So, you know, a lot of like they will actually, they don't pellet the microcystis or those harmful algal blooms, so because they'll eat, you know, other algae, but they'll spit out the, you know, the harmful algal blooms. So there's kind of a correlation here. They're not, because actually when they came in, the lake systems were really, the water would be really clear. That's not actually a good thing. But so there's just a lot of these things that just kind of layer upon each other, and a lot of interesting things that come out of all these things that are happening. Okay, so that, so the people, basically conservation groups are kind of getting sick of a lot of this stuff happening. So coming back to now these big barge systems, and people like touched kind of how some of these other things were getting here. So the zebras were getting here through, I think they're originate, Black or Caspian Sea or something over there. So if they attach to hard surfaces, a lot of these, so basically they all hitchhike to big barge boats and things like that, so they come in then through the canal systems, or they're getting collected in the ballast water. So the ballast water is like balancing the boats out, and they're picking up water out in the Atlantic, and then they're coming into the Great Lakes system, and they're just dumping it all. So it's like it's basically like biological warfare or something like pollution they were talking about. And there's like microscopic things that are in there, things that like the spiny, like there's other things like bloody red shrimp or spiny water flea. There's just so many things, it's just like overwhelming. But so they finally are just putting the pressure on them to kind of make some movement to help, you know, control this ballast water that's out there. So using things like chlorine, ozone, UV, pesticides, and things like that. But won't really require that, well, this is passed on. I'm actually going to find out where they're at with this kind of stuff. And there's just not as many ships coming in as much anyway, so they're already having trouble getting people to use the seaway, because they originally used to charge for it, but I don't think they don't even do that anymore. So not until 2021 were they going to require that, but it's kind of a little too late at that point. You know, so much has been done. So unless there's some new species that we don't know about. So I'm getting there. I know there's so much information. It's the Asian carp. So these guys, again, they were clean out tanks in Arkansas, and they were released in the wild. The big head and silver carp, they don't just invade an ecosystem, they conquer it. So they'll eat up all the plankton and basically starve out the competition. So these again, search them out. They're pretty crazy. So there was a gentleman, I think, for the Army Corps engineer, because they knew of this threat of the Asian carp, so they talked about an electrical barrier. So he kind of hooked up with this gentleman, I think it was in Notre Dame, and he was a scientist there, where they're basically trying to find out, because these carp are really hard to, again, if they're doing like, going out and doing fish sampling, netting to see what kind of fish they're finding, they were never finding the Asian carp. So they're really hard to identify. So this gentleman actually had this like DNA type of process where they could see if they had been there based on, I don't understand it, but it's like they were able to, if they take a sample from the water, they can see if they'd been there based on the DNA. So they were finding it in the Chicago sanitary canal. So I'm like, oh, they've been there. So there was a time they actually, where was it? So, where is that on this one? Oh, the poisoning of the canal in 2009. So there was a big, like, people were wondering what's happening. and they never found them, even though they were finding the DNA there, they didn't find the Asian carp, but they know they're there, they stay low, they're hard to catch and things like that, so. They're showing that they've, been pretty close, to the, going into the Great Lakes, and they may have already, but I have to again touch base, cause I'm not sure when this book was actually, when it was out, so there, I think some of the last thing we talked about was like, 2013 or something, but I'm curious to see where they're at with it, and if they've kind of, if they've really found a lot of population, so. That's a pretty interesting story as well, so they're pretty crazy. We talked about the black swamp already, the Great Black Swamp. So the big thing, there again is the phosphorus loading, nutrient loading, things like that, so it's not only that we're dealing with the invasives, there's this layer on top of it, the nutrient loading, and Lake Erie is the most susceptible for that, so. And again, there's places obviously like, it's really difficult to get out of drinking water. There's been issues here in certain towns where they've had to, stop the water intake to really deal with the harmful algorithms. So there's systems in place to be able to do that, but if you're not knowing it's there, it can be some issues there. So, and then finally going to some of the other things, we're changing lake levels. So there's issues where people are talking about. So channeling as the St. Clair, that's one of the. There's a couple. Remember that goes through. Superior, Lake Huron, it's here in Michigan. So that they actually had to channel out and dig out those things. So people that are in some of the, lakes that are out there, there's the Lake Huron issues of thinking that the lake waters are changing because of the dredging and pulling out of something. So bigger ships can get, it's all about like the shipping industry and it's being channeled for them. So, at least it seems to be that way. So there's, changing lake levels, and I know like a number of years back, Lake Ontario levels were really high. So there's just things that are, there's fluctuation, things that are changing. And just going back, Finger Lakes is an amazing area with freshwater. Great Lakes system is huge and so important. So there's, people are maybe tapping on their doors someday, if there's issues with water going down and things like that. So those are just things that, again, we have to think about and wonder, and everybody deserves and needs access to fresh water, so it might just be something that we have to kind of approach policymakers and things like that. You draw the lines, which some of those Great Lakes states are gonna wanna do. Okay, so adaptation, and there is some hope. This was right at the end of the book, so you talk about all these, the doom and gloom and things that happen, but we are a pretty adaptable species, and we do some things that aren't so great, and we don't realize it, but we can redeem ourselves, or the fish can. So they talk about one of the fish that lived in the Great Lakes, so the whitefish, they started eating mussels and round goby. Round goby, anybody familiar with those? Guys are little fish too, they're also another invasive. But some of the fish some of the natives kind of started building up their population. So there's the lake trout, walleye, smallmouth bass, perch, and brown trout all began feeding on the gobies. They adapted to this new food source, so a great thing was happening with that. And the whitefish, they were eating the mussels, and so this guy, Ken Coyne, who's commercial fishing business, he'd see the ground up mussel paste in their stomachs, and they never used to eat fish, but they were eating fish, these round gobies. So they're adapting to what's there and the resources that are there. So we're all capable of doing that. So maybe that's kind of just learning to adapt and evolve. So watching evolution at play. So after the alewives disappeared, then these native populations began to surge again, which is great. So poison for carp specific. Oh, and then that was another thing they talked about. There was someone else that was kind of developing a very specific poison for these Asian carp. So it was like it would only go to them. So that was another thing. It's just kind of crazy that people can figure these things out. So scientists are pretty amazing. My mind would not even be able to figure that out. So pretty awesome. Okay, I'm pretty much almost done talking. So this is one of his other books. This is the one that they just had the Finger Lakes Land Trust where they interviewed him about with this one. I have not read this one, so I will be looking forward to diving into this one, Devil's Almond. So that's talking about the phosphorus issue that's happening around the globe basically. So if you want, maybe if you're interested in watching that, maybe I'll share that if you send give me your email address or things like that. I think that would be something that's possible. So check this one out if you have. Well, read this one first, and then check this one out. We can talk about it together. Yeah. So I think I was just kind of coming back to that. there are some cool programs around that in our area, so kind of relating it back to our area, not that the Great Lakes are too far from us. We do have, people that are working hard doing the Clean Drain Dry, watercraft stewards, so we help fund that program along with the Finger Lakes Institute in Geneva and the Watershed Council as well, so we have a lot of amazing partners that do a lot of amazing things out there and really help with a lot of these issues. Finger Lakes Institute, they do a lot of our water sampling, like they'll run tests on our sampling when the citizen scientists are out there collecting water samples to find out if there's microcystis or the toxic algae. So we just have so many awesome partners. So if you want more information about what they do, it's great. So, and they also, do things where we do invasive species polls. They've done water chestnut polls down on West River. I think they did it last year. They didn't find it last, and that's good because chestnut is one that can be polled and come back. And you could also learn more about our Lake Friendly Living program, which is things that you can do at home in the community to help with protecting our watershed and lakes. So again, I have some information in the back, and if we run out, I can get you some more from our office. And you can stop by anytime to talk to us if you have concerns or issues. We might not have all the answers, but we can certainly offer some knowledge. So that's our information as well, but those can be on some other things back there. All right, that was a lot. I'm sorry, I probably talked really fast, and I by no means an expert. I just there was just so much to share, and I just again, it doesn't even scratch the surface. It doesn't do it justice as far as all the cool things that are just kind of what he tackles in the book. So he's amazing at what he does, and highly recommend the book. So do you have questions or concerns or thoughts for me at all? Yes.
Just one thing I think that could be emphasized, if Arizona, for example, decides, let's put in a big pipeline, take your water from the Great Lakes, the Canadians are gonna have something to say about that.
Right, yeah, because it's shared.
Isn't there a joint commission?
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
Yep. You got it. Yeah, so it's not as easier sometimes. Yes.
In response to what this gentleman just said, there is only one lake of the 5 that is surrounded only in the United States.
Right.
It's Michigan.
Right,
The
yeah.
other 4 connect with Canada.
Yes.
So Michigan would be the only one that they could draw water from without interfering with Canada. So
Right.
there is some protection from that point.
That's interesting. I know the cool thing too about that, like Michigan and is it Huron are actually one big lake. There's just like a it's something in Huron. So yeah, it's pretty crazy. What else you got?
One of the most impressive things in the book for me was just seeing the map of the watershed of the whole Great Lake system. Because, we think about the Canandaigua watershed, but really all the Finger Lakes and everything that flows north here are all in the, Ontario Falls.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. Or what lake water eventually ends up there, Lake Ontario.
They have that map out to people,
Yeah.
really make them think they don't have to be right on the lake.
Right.
It really affects all the waters.
Yep, exactly. You got it. Yeah.
What is the impact on the Midwest where, their ability to help support, the Great Lakes and Finger Lakes? Because obviously they must have some impact on our water. I mean, they have water sources there, but I'm sure it's all connected somewhere. I don't know.
Right. I'm trying to think the Midwest, like Colorado River is a big piece, and that's actually kind of interesting. They mentioned that a little bit. I'm not sure which states that affects, but there's so many dams, and they have everybody's just trying to pull from the Chicago or the Colorado River. Where does that empty out? I'm trying to remember if it's
Mexico.
Is it down there? So I think I remember reading a number of years back that sometimes when it would get down there, it would almost be dry. Because people down there weren't getting them all.
By the time it gets to it's the day between Montana and Mexico. When it gets there, there's no water.
Yeah, so it's pretty crazy.
So is that watershed separate from this Great Lakes area watershed?
Yeah. So probably the one that would be closer to them would be the Mississippi.
It's the Mississippi River watershed that affects a lot of
Yes.
those states, and I forget how many different states.
Yeah, that mentions that, but
By that. The
that's pretty great, that's kinda like a lot of what contributed to the invasives being removed, cause then you have boats that are on maybe the Mississippi or moving that way, so, yeah, it's, but I mean, it's all interconnected in some way, so, but, yeah, that's a good question though. Any others?
Thank you.
Yeah,